Hey all, Ron here from Military Images Magazine with a new episode of Life on the Civil War a Research Trail. One of the earliest books about the Civil War landed in bookstores in August 1862, while the outcome of the bloody conflict was far from certain. Titled A Narrative of the Campaign of the First Rhode Island Regiment in the spring and summer of 1861, the book describes in great detail the trials and tribulations of one of the Union's first volunteer regiments to respond to the great peril that threatened to destroy the world's experiment in government by the people. The man who wrote the book, he's pictured here, Augustus Woodbury, 35-year-old chaplain of the regiment. He chronicled the organization, the campaigns, and the men who led the Rhode Islanders for a few months after the bombardment of Fort Sumter sparked all-out war. He's dressed here in the unique blouse worn by members of the First. A Harvard educated Unitarian minister, Woodbury's natural gifts for observation, reflection, and communication are evident in this passage of the Battle of Bull Run chapter in his book. Quote, the nation has learned at Manassas that it is civilization and barbarism, freedom and slavery, republicanism and despotism engaged in a life and death grapple, fighting for possession of a continent. The nation has learned that the Union stands for all that is best and noblest in the civilization of the 19th century, the best government that the world ever saw. End quote. A month before the distribution of the book, and on the cusp of President Abraham Lincoln's announcement of the issuance of the Emancipation Proclamation, Woodbury struck a similar refrain in a July 4th oration in Providence, Rhode Island. He said, at every fall of the ensign of secession, there must fall with it a link in the fetters of the slave. Our opponents have been willing to destroy the Union for the sake of slavery. They must not complain if we find it necessary to destroy slavery for the sake of the Union. The time is coming when the preservation of the Republic will be the permanent triumph of liberty. The hero of Woodbury's book, if there is one, is Ambrose Everett Burnside, who was a colonel commanding the Rhode Islanders, later known as a general, remembered for his failure at Fredericksburg months after the publication of Woodbury's book. He's also remembered, you students of the Civil War know, the term sideburns, a play on his name for those generous whiskers he wore throughout his adult life. Forgotten is how he rose up to organize, equip, and lead his fellow Rhode Islanders to the nation's capital during the tentative and uncertain days, weeks, and months following the bombardment of Fort Sumter. I want to share a longer excerpt from Woodbury's book during a lull in the action at First Bull Run, before the tide of battle turned. In this passage, Colonel Burnside is learning about the losses and remembering these losses of his beloved Rhode Islanders, including Colonel Henry W. Slocum, Major Sullivan Ballou, a name you students of the Civil War know from his touching letter read on Ken Burns' Civil War series. And there's others, Lieutenant Henry Prescott and Captain Levi Tower. Captain Woodbury begins. While in this position, that precarious moment when the tide of battle was just about to turn, the Colonel, Burnside, rode up and asked, well, boys, how have you fared? Then, as he saw the vacant places, a tear started in his eye. He remembered that he had lost his friend and brave companion in arms, Slocum. Ballou, the heroic, devoted servant of duty, had fallen mortally wounded, that his gallant young ensign, Captain Tower, was lying dead upon the field, that our own manly Christian soldier, Prescott, had gone to his reward above the smoke and carnage of the battle, and that many of those whom he regarded almost as his children had been mangled or killed. He could not keep back the rising tear. It was but for a moment. He brushed it hastily away and rode once more to the front to meet again the danger. What one of us, who was not absolutely hardened in heart and bereft of all sympathy with pain and grief, but would esteem him all the more that he had the feelings of a man as well as the valor of a soldier. Upon the immediate field where we had been engaged stood a small one-story house. There was a small yard in front, and immediately in front of that, a well of water. The house and yard were full of wounded and dying men, among whom Dr. Harris was hard at work, and many had fallen in the neighborhood of the well. Many others had been brought up from the field. In one room of this house lay Colonel Slocum, speechless but still conscious and recognizing his friends. It was necessary to remove those persons to the rear. The ambulances were driven up, filled, and returned again and again. More men were brought in, bandaged as well as could be done at that place, and sent back to the surgeons who were at Sudley Church and a small house upon the left of the road in the rear. Among those who were brought in and treated were Colonel Jones of the 4th Alabama and several of his privates. Everything possible was done for all, and most of them were sent back. Still, the courage of our men was very noticeable. Not a murmur nor a groan came from their lips. I saw one poor fellow lying on his back in an inner room. "I shall die," said he. "It is useless to do anything for me." And he said it as calmly and coolly as though sitting in a room at home. He was shot through the spine and survived for a few days only. While I was engaged at the house, a man came up to me with a cheerful face and a hearty voice. "Doctor," said he, "I am shot through the shoulder, but I do not mean to give it up so. Do what you can for me and let me go into the fight again." I examined the shoulder, found a piece of flesh as large as an ordinary hen's egg had been shot away, bandaged it for him, and let him go. "Stop a moment. What regiment do you belong to?" "The 69th," said he, and back he went into the battle. Not long after this, I walked out to the brow of the hill to see how the fight was going on. Everything was quiet. The enemy had retired far to our right. Upon a distant hill, 2 regiments were engaged, the Federals driving the rebels up the slope. It was either Colonel Quimby's 13th New York or one of the Connecticut regiments. Far off to the south, probably at Blackburn's Ford, I could see an occasional puff of smoke from the enemy's batteries. On the left, at some distance, were a number of civilians and spectators of the battle. I certainly thought the day was won, and I returned to the house expecting soon to be cheered with the news of complete victory. Everything was promising extremely well. Half an hour later, I noticed that no more ambulances came up, and the field in front was almost entirely deserted. I requested one of the men waiting in the house to go to the rear for an ambulance. He declined doing so. I mounted my horse, which had been quietly grazing under the fire of the enemy, making up for his lost breakfast, and rode to the rear. As I reached the road, I found it crowded with soldiers going down the hill. "Where are you going?" I asked. "We're going for water," said they, and pressed on. I suggested to them that they were going in the wrong direction and that there was plenty of water in front, but they could not be stopped. I rode to the place where our regiment had halted, stopped a moment, and returned to the road, passing up the hill once more. More soldiers now. The road was full of them, asking, "Where is such and such a regiment?" We're filling the way. I met Lieutenant Colonel Wheaton, leading his regiment, the second, who said to me, "A retreat has been ordered." I was thunderstruck. I had supposed that victory was certain. Of course, it wasn't. And there's the moment that Chaplain Woodbury and uncounted others of men experienced. That horrible moment when they thought all was won, and it turned out to be quite the opposite. And of course, this is coming less than a year, published about a year, but his writing less than a year after the battle. So it's a very close primary source, so close to the battle. And this is, of course, Woodbury's memory of what happened. So thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next episode of Life on a Civil War Research Trail.